They are the ones who find the lost. They are the ones who rescue the stranded. They are the ones who know the wilderness better than anyone else alive. Park rangers who have spent decades patrolling the same forests. Search and rescue specialists who have pulled hundreds of people from the brink of death. Military veterans who survived combat zones and trained in the harshest environments on Earth. Wilderness survival instructors who teach others how to stay alive when everything goes wrong. These are not amateurs who wandered off trail and got confused. These are not tourists who underestimated the terrain. These are professionals, experts, people whose entire lives have been dedicated to mastering the wilderness and helping others survive it. They vanished anyway. Over the past 40 years, dozens of professional outdoorsmen have disappeared in American wilderness areas under circumstances that their colleagues cannot explain. Rangers who knew every trail, every drainage, every rock formation in their districts. Search and rescue veterans who had found hundreds of missing persons but could not be found themselves. Military operators who had survived conditions that would kill ordinary people. These cases are different from typical missing persons investigations. When an amateur disappears, investigators can attribute it to inexperience, poor judgment, or lack of preparation. When a professional disappears, those explanations do not work. These people did everything right. They had the skills, the equipment, the knowledge, and the experience. They still vanished, and the evidence they left behind raises questions that their fellow professionals, the people most qualified to understand what might have happened, cannot answer. Equipment found in locations that should have been impossible to reach. Radio transmissions that made no sense. GPS data showing movements that defy physics. Search dogs, the same dogs these professionals had worked with for years, refusing to continue past certain points. If anyone should have been able to survive in the wilderness, it was these people. If anyone should have been able to find their way back, it was these people. If anyone should have left a trail that could be followed, it was these people. They did not. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. What you are about to hear involves people who dedicated their lives to preventing exactly what happened to them. These are the cases that keep their colleagues awake at night. These are the disappearances that make even the most experienced wilderness professionals question what they think they know. We begin with a park ranger who had spent 23 years patrolling the same national forest. A man who knew the terrain so well that other rangers called him for directions. A man who had participated in more than 200 search and rescue operations and had never failed to find what he was looking for. On the night he disappeared, he was 1 mile from the ranger station where he had worked for more than 2 decades. He had walked that path thousands of times. He knew every tree, every rock, every turn in the trail. He never arrived. The Shoshone National Forest in northwestern Wyoming encompasses more than 2.5 million acres of wilderness, making it one of the largest national forests in the United States. The terrain ranges from sagebrush valleys at 6,000 feet to glaciated peaks exceeding 13,000 feet. The forest contains some of the most remote wilderness in the lower 48 states, including areas that can only be accessed by multi-day backpacking trips or horseback. The forest is also home to one of the highest concentrations of large predators in North America. Grizzly bears, black bears, mountain lions, and wolves all inhabit the region. Rangers who work here must be constantly aware of wildlife and prepared for encounters that could turn dangerous. Thomas Caldwell had been a ranger in the Shoshone National Forest since 1991. He started as a seasonal employee fresh out of forestry school and worked his way up to district ranger, responsible for more than 400,000 acres of wilderness. He knew the forest better than anyone. His colleagues described him as methodical, cautious, and supremely competent. He had participated in more than 200 search and rescue operations over his career, helping to locate lost hikers, crashed aircraft, and people who had simply wandered too far from established trails. He had a reputation for being able to find anyone. He could read terrain, predict behavior, and follow traces that other searchers missed. Thomas was 54 years old in October of 2014. He had a wife, 2 adult children, and 3 grandchildren. He was planning to retire in 2 years and had already bought property near Cody, where he intended to spend his remaining years fishing and hiking at a more leisurely pace. On October 17, 2014, Thomas was working a late shift at the Wapiti Ranger Station, handling paperwork and monitoring radio communications. The station was quiet. Tourist season was winding down, and most visitors had left the high country before the first heavy snows. At approximately 8:30 in the evening, Thomas radioed dispatch to report that he was going to walk to a nearby equipment shed to check on some supplies that had been delivered earlier in the day. The shed was approximately 1 mile from the ranger station, connected by a well-maintained service road that Thomas had walked hundreds of times. He told dispatch he would check in when he arrived at the shed. He never checked in. At 9:15, when Thomas had not reported in for 45 minutes, dispatch tried to reach him by radio. No response. They tried his cell phone. No answer. They tried the landline at the equipment shed. It rang without pickup. At 9:45, 2 rangers from the station drove the service road to the equipment shed. They found the shed locked, the lights off, no sign that Thomas had ever arrived. They drove back along the road slowly, scanning with spotlights. They found nothing. By midnight, a full search was underway. More than 20 personnel from the Forest Service, County Sheriff's Office, and local search and rescue teams converged on the area. The search focused on the 1-mile stretch of road between the ranger station and the equipment shed. The terrain along the road was not challenging. The road itself was gravel, well-maintained, and regularly traveled. On either side was mixed forest, relatively open with good visibility. There were no cliffs, no water hazards, no obvious dangers. The searchers found Thomas's flashlight at approximately 2 o'clock in the morning. It was lying in the middle of the road, approximately half a mile from the ranger station. The flashlight was turned on, the beam still visible in the darkness. The batteries were still strong. It appeared to have been dropped or set down in the center of the gravel surface. There was no sign of Thomas anywhere nearby. Dogs were brought in at first light. They picked up Thomas's scent at the ranger station and followed it along the road to the location where the flashlight was found. At that point, the dogs exhibited behavior that the handlers found deeply troubling. The primary tracking dog, a bloodhound named Duke, who had worked with Thomas on numerous search operations, tracked to the flashlight location and stopped. He circled the area several times, then sat down and began to whine. The handler tried to encourage him to continue. Duke would not move. A second dog was brought in. She tracked to the same location and exhibited the same behavior. She would not continue in any direction. The handlers were experienced professionals who had worked hundreds of searches. They had never seen dogs react this way. When a trail ends at a water crossing, dogs show specific behaviors. When a person enters a vehicle, dogs show specific behaviors. When a trail simply ends in the middle of a gravel road, dogs should not stop. There should be a direction to follow. Duke and the other dogs indicated no direction. The trail ended. Thomas's scent stopped at that location as if he had ceased to exist. The search expanded to cover the surrounding forest. Hundreds of personnel participated over the following 2 weeks. Helicopters flew grid patterns. Specialized teams checked every drainage, every cliff band, every possible location where a person might have fallen or become trapped. On October 20th, 3 days after Thomas disappeared, searchers made a discovery approximately 4 miles from where the flashlight was found. It was Thomas's radio. The radio was sitting on top of a large boulder at the edge of a remote meadow, positioned upright, as if placed there deliberately. The radio was turned on. The battery was nearly dead from continuous operation, but when technicians later examined it, they found something unexpected. The radio had been transmitting. Between approximately 9 o'clock on the night Thomas disappeared and the time the battery died, the radio had made more than 60 transmission attempts. Most were brief, lasting only a few seconds. The audio that was captured by repeater stations in the area was mostly static, but 3 transmissions contained what appeared to be Thomas's voice. The first, at 9:17, was fragmentary. The only intelligible words were something and don't understand. The second, at 10:42, was clearer. Thomas's voice said, "This is Caldwell. I don't know where I am. The stars are wrong. The third, at 11:58, was the longest." Thomas's voice said, "If anyone can hear this, I need help. I've been walking for hours, but I keep ending up in the same place. There's something in the trees. I can hear it moving, but I can't see it. I don't..." The transmission cut off mid-sentence. The radio was found 4 miles from the road where Thomas's flashlight was discovered. The terrain between those 2 points is extremely difficult, consisting of steep ridges, dense forest, and multiple stream crossings. An experienced hiker moving quickly in daylight might cover that distance in 3 to 4 hours. Thomas's flashlight was found at approximately 2 in the morning. His first radio transmission was at 9:17, less than an hour after he left the ranger station. If Thomas was at the location where the radio was found by 9:17, he would have had to cover 4 miles of difficult terrain in less than 45 minutes, in the dark, without his flashlight. That is not possible, but the radio was there, and the transmissions came from that radio, and Thomas's voice was on those transmissions. The search continued for another 11 days. Thomas Caldwell was never found. His colleagues have spent years trying to understand what happened. These are people who have participated in hundreds of searches, who have seen every way that a person can be lost or injured or killed in the wilderness. None of them can explain the evidence. Thomas knew that road. He had walked it thousands of times. There was no reason for him to leave it. There was no reason for him to drop his flashlight in the middle of the gravel surface. The radio transmission suggests he was confused, disoriented, possibly terrified. But Thomas was not a person who became confused or disoriented. He was the person others called when they needed to find someone who was confused and disoriented. The stars are wrong. What did he mean by that? Was he delirious? Was he seeing something that altered his perception? Or was he somewhere that the stars actually appeared different? There's something in the trees. I can hear it moving, but I can't see it. The Shoshone Forest has grizzly bears, mountain lions, wolves. Thomas knew all of these animals. He had encountered them many times. He would have identified them. He would have said bear or lion or wolf. He said something. What was in those trees? Thomas's wife, Margaret, has listened to those radio transmissions hundreds of times. She says her husband sounded scared. In 30 years of marriage, through encounters with grizzlies, forest fires, and every other danger the wilderness could produce, she had never heard fear in his voice. She does not know what frightened her husband. She does not know where he was when he made those calls. She does not know why a man who could find anyone became someone who could not be found. She knows only that he walked down a road he had traveled thousands of times, dropped his flashlight in the middle of the gravel, and disappeared. Thomas Caldwell has been missing for 11 years. His case remains officially open. His body has never been found. A 23-year veteran. More than 200 successful searches. 1 mile from the ranger station where he had worked for decades. Gone. What happened on that road in October of 2014? What did Thomas encounter that made him leave the path? Where was he when he made those radio transmissions? What was in the trees that he could hear but not see? We do not know. If you are finding these cases as disturbing as we believe you should, take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications. We have more disappearances to cover, and each one involves a professional whose skills should have prevented exactly what happened. The next case involves a military veteran whose training should have made survival almost guaranteed. A man who had served in combat zones and completed some of the most demanding military courses in existence. A man who disappeared during a routine training exercise and left behind GPS data that his fellow soldiers still cannot explain. Fort Carson is a United States Army installation located near Colorado Springs, Colorado. The base covers more than 214 square miles and includes terrain ranging from high plains to mountain foothills. The installation is used for training exercises year-round, with thousands of soldiers conducting operations in the field at any given time. Sergeant First Class Derek Morrison was 38 years old in July of 2018. He was a career soldier with 18 years of service, including multiple deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. He had served in Army Special Forces and had completed survival training that most people cannot imagine. Derek was the kind of soldier that other soldiers looked up to. He was calm under pressure, physically fit, and possessed an almost supernatural ability to navigate and survive in difficult conditions. His commanding officers described him as one of the most capable soldiers they had ever served with. On July 15, 2018, Derek was participating in a solo land navigation exercise in a remote section of the Fort Carson training area. The exercise was routine. Soldiers were given coordinates and required to navigate to multiple checkpoints over a 3-day period using map and compass. GPS devices were carried for emergency use and tracking purposes only. Derek departed the staging area at 0600 on July 15th. He was expected to reach his first checkpoint by 1800 that evening, approximately 12 hours later. The distance was roughly 15 miles through moderately difficult terrain. At 1745, Derek's GPS tracker showed him approximately 2 miles from the first checkpoint. He was on schedule, moving at a steady pace. Everything was normal. At 1752, the GPS showed Derek had stopped moving. This was not unusual. Soldiers often stopped to rest, check their maps, or assess terrain before continuing. At 1759, the GPS showed Derek had moved again, but the direction was wrong. Instead of continuing toward the checkpoint, the tracker showed Derek moving perpendicular to his previous course, heading east toward a drainage that led away from his objective. The pace was faster than before, approximately 4 miles per hour, almost a jog. At 1812, the tracker showed Derek had covered more than half a mile in the wrong direction. He was now moving even faster, nearly 5 miles per hour, through terrain that would make such speed extremely difficult. At 1823, the tracker showed Derek had stopped again. His position was in the middle of a steep ravine, approximately 1.3 miles from where he had changed course. At 1824, the tracker showed Derek moving again. This time, the direction was straight up. The GPS data indicated that Derek's elevation increased by more than 300 feet in less than 4 minutes. He was in a ravine with walls that were steep but not vertical. Climbing out would be possible, but would take significant time and effort. Gaining 300 feet of elevation in 4 minutes would require almost superhuman effort, or it would require something other than climbing. At 1829, the GPS signal was lost. The tracking team at the staging area noticed the anomalies within minutes. They tried to reach Derek by radio. No response. They dispatched a vehicle to his last known position. The terrain in that area was accessible only by foot. The vehicle got as close as possible, and a 4-man team hiked into Derek's last transmitted location. They reached the ravine at approximately 2100. What they found made no sense. Derek's pack was at the bottom of the ravine, sitting upright against a rock. Inside were his food, water, map, compass, and survival equipment. Everything was present and appeared undisturbed. His rifle was leaning against a tree approximately 20 feet from the pack. It was unloaded. The magazine was in his pack. His GPS tracker was on the ground near the rifle. It was still functioning. The battery was still charged. It had simply stopped transmitting. Derek himself was not there. The team searched the immediate area until dark, then established a perimeter and waited for reinforcements. By morning, more than 50 soldiers were involved in the search. Dogs were brought in from Fort Carson's military working dog unit. These were highly trained animals, experienced in tracking humans in every conceivable terrain. The dogs picked up Derek's scent at the pack and followed it approximately 40 yards to the base of the ravine wall. There, they stopped. The handler reported that his dog tracked to a specific point at the bottom of the rock face, then looked up. The dog whined, paced back and forth, and continued to look up at the wall above. The handler had worked with this dog for 3 years. He had never seen this behavior. The dog was indicating that Derek's trail went up, straight up, 300 feet of steep rock face. Technical climbers examined the wall. It was climbable but would require equipment and significant time. Free climbing would be possible for an expert, but dangerous and slow. No one could ascend that face in 4 minutes, yet the GPS data showed exactly that. Derek had gained 300 feet of elevation in 4 minutes. Then his signal had disappeared. The search continued for 12 days. Soldiers covered every inch of terrain within a 10-mile radius. Helicopters flew continuous patterns. Thermal imaging was used to search for heat signatures. Derek Morrison was never found. The Army's investigation could not explain the evidence. The GPS data was verified by multiple technicians. The device was functioning correctly. Derek had actually moved in the patterns the data showed. But those patterns were impossible. A soldier cannot run nearly 5 miles per hour through steep, rocky terrain. A soldier cannot climb 300 feet in 4 minutes without equipment. A soldier does not simply vanish from the top of a ravine wall. Derek's fellow soldiers have discussed the case extensively in the years since his disappearance. These are men who have survived combat, who have trained in the most difficult conditions imaginable, who do not frighten easily. They are frightened by what happened to Derek Morrison. One sergeant who participated in the search said that when they reached the ravine, the area felt wrong. He could not articulate what he meant by that. The terrain looked normal. The sounds were normal. But something felt off, as if they were being watched by something they could not see. Another soldier reported that during the night search, his radio picked up a brief transmission that sounded like Derek's voice. The transmission lasted less than 2 seconds. The only word that was intelligible was above. The transmission was not logged by the base communication center. No recording exists. The soldier insists he heard it, but there is no evidence that it occurred. Derek's wife, Jennifer, received the standard Army notification that her husband was missing and presumed Reeves. She has never accepted the presumption. She knows her husband's capabilities. She knows he could survive anything the wilderness could throw at him. She also knows that the GPS data shows something that should not be possible. She has watched the playback dozens of times. Her husband walking toward his checkpoint, stopping, turning, moving faster than he should have been able to move, climbing faster than anyone could climb. Then, nothing. Where did he go? What made him turn away from his objective and move toward that ravine? How did he ascend 300 feet in 4 minutes? What was above him that he mentioned in that possible radio transmission? Derek Morrison has been missing for 7 years. His case remains officially open within the Army's records. His body has never been found. An 18-year veteran, Special Forces training, survival skills that could keep him alive in any environment. Gone. In 90 minutes, Derek went from being on schedule for a routine exercise to being one of the most puzzling disappearances in Fort Carson history. The GPS data says he climbed a cliff face in 4 minutes. The dogs say his trail went straight up. His fellow soldiers say the ravine felt wrong. What happened in that ravine in July of 2018? What was Derek moving toward? Or what was he running from? Why did his GPS tracker simply stop transmitting at the top of that climb? Where is Sergeant First Class Derek Morrison? We do not know. We have now examined 2 cases. A park ranger who knew his territory better than anyone and vanished on a road he had walked thousands of times. A Special Forces soldier whose GPS tracker recorded movements that defy the limits of human capability. Both were professionals at the peak of their abilities. Both disappeared under circumstances that their colleagues cannot explain. Both left behind evidence that raises more questions than answers. These patterns will appear again in the cases that follow. Search and rescue veterans who found everyone except themselves. Survival instructors who could not survive. Men and women whose entire careers prepared them for the wilderness, who should have been able to handle anything they encountered. They could not handle what they encountered. In Part 2, we will examine 2 more cases. One involves a search and rescue team leader who disappeared during an actual rescue operation. The rescue was successful. The victim was found and saved, but the team leader who found them never came back. Another involves a wilderness survival instructor who vanished in an area where he had taught survival courses for more than 15 years. His students found his equipment arranged in a pattern that none of them could explain. Subscribe now if you have not already. Turn on notifications so you do not miss Part 2. And drop a comment below with your thoughts on these cases. What do you think happened to Thomas Caldwell on that road? How did Derek Morrison climb 300 feet in 4 minutes? We read every comment. Some of you have military or law enforcement backgrounds. Some of you have search and rescue experience. Your perspectives might help us understand what is happening to these professionals. Part 2 is coming. The cases get stranger, the questions get harder, and we still have not found any of these people. If you have not seen Part 1, stop now and go watch it. These cases build on each other, and you need to understand who we are talking about before we continue. In Part 1, we examined 2 disappearances involving professionals whose skills should have prevented exactly what happened to them. Thomas Caldwell, a park ranger with 23 years of experience, who vanished while walking 1 mile between his ranger station and an equipment shed, a path he had traveled thousands of times. His flashlight was found in the middle of the road. His radio was found 4 miles away, containing transmissions where he said the stars were wrong and something was in the trees that he could hear but could not see. His scent trail ended in the middle of a gravel road, and tracking dogs refused to continue in any direction. Derek Morrison, a Special Forces sergeant with 18 years of military service, who disappeared during a routine land navigation exercise. His GPS tracker recorded him moving at nearly 5 miles per hour through difficult terrain, then ascending 300 feet of cliff face in 4 minutes. His pack, rifle, and equipment were found at the bottom of a ravine. His trail, according to the dogs, went straight up. He was never seen again. Both men were experts. Both knew exactly what they were doing. Both vanished under circumstances that their colleagues, people with decades of wilderness experience, cannot explain. The cases we will cover in this video add new dimensions to these patterns. One involves a search and rescue team leader who disappeared during an actual rescue operation. He found the missing victim. He saved their life. Then he vanished on the way back. The other involves a wilderness survival instructor who disappeared in an area where he had taught courses for more than 15 years, leaving behind equipment arranged in a way that none of his colleagues could interpret. These are people who rescue others, people who teach others how to survive, people who should have been immune to whatever takes people in the wilderness. They were not immune. Let us continue. The Cascade Range extends from Northern California through Oregon and Washington into British Columbia. The mountains are volcanic in origin, formed by the same tectonic forces that created the Pacific Ring of Fire. The range includes some of the most dramatic peaks in North America, including Mount Rainier, Mount Hood, and Mount Shasta. The terrain is challenging. Dense forest at lower elevations gives way to alpine meadows, glaciers, and bare rock near the summits. Weather can change rapidly, with clear skies turning to whiteout conditions within minutes. The mountains claim lives every year from experienced climbers and hikers who underestimate the dangers. When people get into trouble in the Cascades, they call search and rescue. These volunteer organizations operate throughout the range, responding to calls at any hour, in any weather. The people who do this work are dedicated professionals who train constantly and put their lives at risk to help strangers. Michael Reeves was one of the best. Michael was 44 years old in September of 2016. He had been involved in search and rescue for more than 20 years, starting as a volunteer in college and eventually becoming team leader for the Snohomish County Search and Rescue Unit in Washington State. He had participated in more than 500 rescue operations. He had saved countless lives. His colleagues described him as calm, methodical, and absolutely reliable. When a call came in, Michael was usually the first to respond. He had an uncanny ability to predict where missing people would be found, based on terrain, weather, and human psychology. Other team leaders consulted him on difficult cases. He was considered one of the most skilled search and rescue professionals in the Pacific Northwest. Michael worked as a civil engineer during the day, but his passion was rescue work. He spent most of his free time training, maintaining equipment, and mentoring younger volunteers. His wife, Sandra, sometimes joked that she was married to the mountains as much as to Michael. On September 23, 2016, the Snohomish County team received a call at approximately 1400. A solo hiker had failed to return from a day hike on a trail near Mount Pilchuck. The hiker, a 26-year-old woman named Jennifer Okonkwo, had planned a simple out-and-back route and was expected home by noon. Her car was still at the trailhead. She was not answering her phone. Michael assembled a team of 6 volunteers and departed for the trailhead within the hour. The weather was deteriorating, with clouds moving in from the west and rain expected by evening. Time was critical. The team reached the trailhead at approximately 1600 and began their search. Michael divided the group into 3 pairs, assigning each pair a section of trail and surrounding terrain to cover. He took the most difficult section himself, partnering with a younger volunteer named Kevin Park. The trail to Mount Pilchuck is approximately 2.7 miles each way, gaining approximately 2,200 feet of elevation. The terrain is steep and rocky, with exposed sections near the summit. In poor weather, it is easy to become disoriented. Michael and Kevin hiked quickly, checking side trails and scanning the terrain for any sign of the missing hiker. At approximately 1730, they reached a section of trail that traversed a steep slope below a rock outcropping. The trail was narrow here, with exposure on the downhill side. Michael stopped. He told Kevin he saw something below the trail, approximately 100 feet down the slope. It looked like a person. Kevin could not see what Michael was pointing at. The vegetation was thick, and the light was fading. But Michael was certain. He radioed the other teams to report a possible sighting and began descending the slope. The terrain was treacherous. Loose rock, wet vegetation, and steep angles made every step dangerous. Kevin followed Michael down, moving carefully. At approximately 1745, Michael reached the object he had seen. It was Jennifer Okonkwo. She was alive, but injured, with what appeared to be a broken ankle. She had fallen from the trail several hours earlier and had been unable to climb back up. Michael radioed for evacuation support and began administering first aid. Jennifer was cold, frightened, and in pain, but her condition was not life-threatening. Michael stabilized her ankle, gave her water and food from his pack, and kept her calm while waiting for the rest of the team. The other team members arrived at approximately 1815. They had brought a litter and additional medical supplies. The group began preparing Jennifer for evacuation, a slow and difficult process given the terrain. At approximately 1830, Michael told Kevin that he was going to hike back up to the trail to scout the best evacuation route. The slope they had descended was too steep to carry a litter safely. He wanted to find an alternative path. Kevin offered to go with him. Michael said no. He said he would be faster alone, and they needed Kevin to help with the patient. He said he would radio when he found a good route. Michael began climbing back toward the trail. Kevin watched him ascend for approximately 5 minutes until the fading light and vegetation obscured his view. That was the last time anyone saw Michael Reeves. At 1845, Kevin tried to radio Michael for a status update. No response. At 1900, with the evacuation preparation complete, Kevin tried again. Still no response. At 1915, concerned, Kevin hiked up to the trail to look for Michael. He found nothing. No Michael. No sign of where he had gone. The evacuation of Jennifer Okonkwo proceeded as planned. She was carried out safely and transported to a hospital, where she made a full recovery. The rescue was successful, but Michael Reeves never came back. A second search operation began immediately. The same team that had just rescued Jennifer now searched for their own leader. They were joined by additional volunteers from neighboring counties, eventually numbering more than 150 personnel. The search covered every inch of the terrain between where Michael was last seen and the main trail. They checked the trail itself, the surrounding forest, the rock outcroppings above. They brought in dogs. They brought in helicopters with thermal imaging. On the second day of the search, a volunteer found Michael's radio. It was sitting on a flat rock approximately 300 yards from where Michael had been ascending the slope. The rock was not on the direct path to the trail. It was off to the side, in an area of dense brush that would have required deliberate effort to reach. The radio was positioned upright, antenna extended, as if placed there carefully. The radio was turned on. The battery was nearly dead. When technicians examined the radio, they found something disturbing. The radio had been transmitting. Between approximately 1835 and 1852, the radio had made 17 transmission attempts. Most were brief bursts of static, but 2 contained audio that appeared to be Michael's voice. The first, at 1841, contained the words, "I see it," followed by static. The second, at 1847, was longer. Michael's voice said, "This is Reeves. I don't know what. It's not. The trail is gone. I can see the team below me, but I can't get to them. There's something between us. I can see it now. The transmission ended mid-sentence. The team members who were below on the slope at that time did not hear these transmissions. Their radios were set to the same frequency. They should have received the calls. They heard nothing. The dogs tracked Michael's scent from where Kevin last saw him ascending the slope. The trail led upward for approximately 200 feet, then turned sharply to the right, toward the area where the radio was found. At the rock where the radio was sitting, the dogs stopped. They circled the area repeatedly, sniffing the ground, the rock, the surrounding vegetation. They would not proceed in any direction. One handler reported that his dog exhibited behavior he had only seen once before, on a search where the missing person had been taken by a mountain lion. The dog was acting as if a predator was present, but there was no scent of any predator, no tracks, no sign of any animal. The search continued for 14 days. Michael Reeves was never found. The rescue community was devastated. Michael had spent 20 years saving other people. He had responded to more than 500 emergencies. He had always come home. His colleagues have analyzed the case exhaustively. They have examined every detail of the terrain, the weather, the timeline. None of them can explain what happened. Michael was ascending a slope he had just descended. He knew exactly where the trail was. He knew exactly where his team was. He was one of the most experienced navigators in the region. How did he get lost? The radio transmission suggests he became disoriented. He said the trail was gone. He said he could see his team, but could not reach them. He said there was something between them. What was between Michael and his team? The slope was steep, but not impassable. The distance was less than 300 yards. If Michael could see his team, he should have been able to reach them. There was no obstacle visible to anyone else. I see it. What did Michael see? I can see it now. What was he looking at? Sandra Reeves has listened to those radio transmissions hundreds of times. She says her husband sounded confused at first, then increasingly frightened. Michael was not a man who frightened easily. He had faced every danger the mountains could produce and had never lost his composure. He lost it that night. Sandra does not believe her husband simply fell and died somewhere on that slope. The search was too thorough. The terrain was too well covered. If Michael's body was there, it would have been found. She believes something else happened. Something that the evidence suggests but does not explain. She does not know what took her husband. She only knows that he went up a slope to find an evacuation route and never came back. She knows that his radio was found in a location he should not have been. She knows that his transmissions described something that no one else could see. Michael Reeves has been missing for 9 years. His case remains officially open. His body has never been found. The rescue he led was successful. Jennifer Okonkwo is alive today because of Michael and his team. She has met with Sandra several times. She carries the weight of knowing that someone vanished while saving her life. Michael Reeves spent 20 years rescuing people from the wilderness. On September 23, 2016, the wilderness took him instead. What happened on that slope? What did Michael see that he could not identify? What was between him and his team that prevented him from reaching them? Where is Michael Reeves? We do not know. If you want to see more cases like this one, subscribe now and turn on notifications. We have more disappearances to cover, and each one challenges what we think we know about survival in the wilderness. The next case involves a man who taught others how to survive. A man who had spent more than 15 years instructing students in wilderness survival techniques. A man who disappeared in an area he knew better than his own backyard, leaving behind equipment arranged in a pattern that his fellow instructors have never been able to explain. The Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness spans more than 1 million acres along the Minnesota-Canada border. The region contains more than 1,000 lakes, hundreds of miles of streams, and some of the most pristine wilderness remaining in the eastern United States. The terrain is characterized by boreal forest, exposed bedrock, and waterways that have been traveled by humans for thousands of years. The Boundary Waters attracts outdoor enthusiasts from around the world. Canoeing, camping, fishing, and wilderness travel are the primary activities. The region is also home to numerous outdoor education programs, including schools that teach wilderness survival skills to students of all ages. Craig Westbrook was one of the most respected survival instructors in the region. Craig was 51 years old in August of 2020. He had been teaching wilderness survival since 1999, originally in the Pacific Northwest before moving to Minnesota in 2005. He had trained thousands of students in skills ranging from fire-making and shelter construction to navigation, foraging, and cold weather survival. His colleagues described him as a master of his craft. He could start a fire in any conditions, build a shelter that would withstand the worst weather, and navigate without map or compass using natural indicators. He had written 2 books on wilderness survival and was frequently consulted by film productions that needed technical expertise. Craig lived alone in a cabin near Ely, Minnesota, the gateway community to the Boundary Waters. He had never married. The wilderness was his life. When he was not teaching courses, he spent his time exploring the backcountry, often disappearing for weeks at a time on solo expeditions. On August 14, 2020, Craig departed on one of these solo trips. He planned to spend 10 days in a remote section of the Boundary Waters that he knew intimately. He had been to this area dozens of times. He had taught courses there. He knew every lake, every portage, every campsite. He told a colleague, a fellow instructor named David Chen, that he planned to test some new survival techniques he was developing for an advanced county sheriff's office. Search teams entered the Boundary Waters on August 29th. They knew Craig's general planned route and began checking the lakes and campsites along it. On August 30th, they found Craig's canoe. The canoe was pulled up on the shore of a small lake, approximately 15 miles from the nearest access point. It was positioned correctly, inverted to protect the interior from rain, exactly as Craig would have left it. His paddle was underneath. His main pack was inside the canoe. It contained his food, water filter, cooking equipment, clothing, and survival kit. Everything appeared to be present and undisturbed. His tent, sleeping bag, and camping equipment were set up at a site approximately 50 yards from the canoe. The tent was pitched correctly, the sleeping bag was laid out inside, and the camp showed signs of recent use. A fire ring contained ash from what appeared to be a recent fire. Craig himself was not there. The search expanded from the campsite. Dogs were brought in. They picked up Craig's scent at the camp and followed it along a game trail leading away from the lake toward a section of dense forest. Approximately 400 yards from the camp, the dogs began exhibiting unusual behavior. The lead dog stopped at a small clearing in the forest. She circled the clearing repeatedly, sniffing the ground, then sat down and refused to continue. The handler tried to encourage her. She would not move. A second dog was brought in. He tracked to the same clearing and stopped at the same location. He whined continuously and kept looking around as if searching for something he could not find. The handlers had decades of combined experience. They had never seen this behavior from 2 dogs at the same location. What the searchers found in the clearing made the situation even more puzzling. Craig's survival knife was stuck blade first into the ground at the exact center of the clearing. The knife was one of his most prized possessions, a custom blade he had used for more than 15 years. He never went anywhere without it. Arranged around the knife in a precise circle were smaller items from Craig's kit: his fire steel, his compass, his signal mirror, his water bottle, his headlamp. 6 items total, evenly spaced around the central knife. The circle was approximately 8 feet in diameter. The spacing between items was almost exactly equal. The arrangement was deliberate, precise, clearly intentional. Beyond the circle, approximately 10 feet from its edge, searchers found Craig's boots. They were positioned side by side, toes pointing toward the center of the circle, laces tied. His socks were folded neatly inside the boots. Craig's shirt was found draped over a branch approximately 15 feet from the circle. His pants were found folded on the ground nearby. Craig Westbrook had apparently removed his clothing, arranged his equipment in a precise geometric pattern, and walked away from the clearing, wearing nothing but his underwear. Why would a survival expert, a man who had spent his life teaching people how to stay alive in the wilderness, remove his clothes and his equipment and walk away into the forest? The search intensified around the clearing. If Craig was barefoot and nearly naked, he could not have traveled far. The terrain was rough. The weather, while warm during the day, dropped into the 50s at night. Mosquitoes and biting flies were severe. A person without clothing, without equipment, without shoes, should have been findable within a mile or two of where they undressed. Craig was not found. The search continued for 16 days. More than 200 personnel participated, including Forest Service rangers, sheriff's deputies, volunteers, and tracking specialists. They covered every inch of terrain within a 5-mile radius of the clearing. They checked every lake, every swamp, every thicket where a person might have collapsed. Nothing. No clothing. No footprints beyond the immediate vicinity of the clearing. No body. No further sign of Craig Westbrook. His fellow instructors examined the evidence in detail. They photographed the clearing. They measured the distances between items. They analyzed the arrangement. None of them could explain it. The circle was almost perfectly round. The spacing was almost perfectly even. The knife at the center was positioned exactly upright. This was not random arrangement. This was deliberate geometry. But what did it mean? Some of Craig's colleagues speculated that he might have been conducting some kind of ritual or experiment. Craig was interested in indigenous survival techniques and had studied how native peoples related to the wilderness. Perhaps he was testing some practice he had learned about. But no one who knew Craig believed he would remove all his clothing and walk into the forest. That was not survival. That was the opposite of survival. It contradicted everything Craig believed and taught. Others speculated that Craig might have experienced a mental health crisis. Perhaps he became confused, disoriented, delusional. Perhaps the isolation triggered something that caused him to behave irrationally. But Craig had spent years alone in the wilderness. He had never shown any signs of mental instability. His messages just days before his disappearance were coherent and normal. David Chen has visited the clearing several times since Craig's disappearance. He has stood in the center, where the knife was found, and tried to understand what his friend was doing. He has no answers. He has noticed something, however, that he finds disturbing. Whenever he visits the clearing, he feels watched. He cannot explain it. There is no evidence of anyone else present. The forest sounds normal, but he feels observed, as if something in the trees is aware of his presence. He does not stay long in the clearing. He does not like being there. Craig's sister, who lives in Oregon, has tried to understand what happened to her brother. She has researched his interests, his beliefs, his practices. She has spoken with his colleagues, his students, his friends. No one can explain the circle. She has considered the possibility that Craig encountered something in the forest, something that caused him to behave in ways that made no sense, something that drew him away from his equipment, his clothing, his skills. She does not know what that something might be. She only knows that her brother was one of the most capable wilderness survivors in the country, and he walked away from everything that kept him alive. Craig Westbrook has been missing for 5 years. His case remains officially open. His body has never been found. His knife is still in evidence storage. The blade shows no signs of use after it was placed in the ground. Whatever Craig was doing, he did not use his knife to do it. A survival instructor with more than 20 years of experience. A man who had taught thousands of students how to stay alive. A man who knew the boundary waters better than almost anyone. He removed his clothes. He arranged his equipment in a circle. He walked into the forest barefoot. Gone. What was Craig doing in that clearing? Why did he arrange his equipment in that specific pattern? What made him remove his clothing and walk away? What was he walking toward? Or what was he walking away from? Where is Craig Westbrook? We do not know. We have now examined 4 cases. A park ranger who vanished on a road he knew by heart. A special forces soldier whose GPS recorded impossible movements. A search and rescue leader who disappeared while saving someone else. A survival instructor who walked away from everything that kept him alive. 4 professionals, 4 experts, 4 people whose skills should have protected them from exactly what happened. The patterns continue to emerge. Equipment arranged deliberately rather than dropped. Scent trails that end at specific locations. Radio transmissions describing things that cannot be identified. Behavior that contradicts everything known about the missing person. These people did not make mistakes. They did not get lost. They did not simply wander off and die. Something else happened. In Part 3, we will examine 2 final cases and attempt to draw conclusions from everything we have learned. One involves a military survival instructor who vanished during a training exercise he had led dozens of times. The other involves a retired ranger who returned to the forest where he had worked for 30 years and was never seen again. We will also examine the theories that have been proposed to explain these disappearances. We will consider what the evidence suggests about what is happening to these professionals. We will ask questions that may not have answers. Subscribe now if you have not already. Turn on notifications so you do not miss Part 3. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. What do you think Michael Reeves saw on that slope? Why did Craig Westbrook arrange his equipment in a circle? We read every comment. Some of you have backgrounds in search and rescue, survival training, or military operations. Your perspectives might help us understand what is happening. Part 3 is coming. The final cases, the final questions, and we still have not found any of these people. This is the final part of our investigation into professionals who vanished in the wilderness they had dedicated their lives to mastering. If you have not seen Parts 1 and 2, stop here and go back. Everything we are about to discuss builds on what came before. You need to understand who these people were before you can understand what happened to them. In Part 1, we examined 2 cases. Thomas Caldwell, a park ranger with 23 years of experience, who vanished while walking 1 mile on a road he had traveled thousands of times. His flashlight was found in the middle of the gravel. His radio was found 4 miles away, with transmissions saying the stars were wrong and something was in the trees. Derek Morrison, a Special Forces sergeant with 18 years of military service, whose GPS tracker recorded him climbing 300 feet of cliff face in 4 minutes before his signal disappeared forever. In Part 2, we covered 2 more cases. Michael Reeves, a search and rescue team leader who vanished while ascending a slope after successfully finding a missing hiker. His radio contained transmissions describing something between him and his team that prevented him from reaching them. Craig Westbrook, a wilderness survival instructor who removed his clothes, arranged his equipment in a precise circle, and walked barefoot into the forest, never to be seen again. 4 professionals, 4 experts, 4 people who had spent decades mastering the wilderness. 4 disappearances that their colleagues, the most qualified people in the world to understand what might have happened, cannot explain. The cases we will examine in this final part complete the pattern. One involves a military survival instructor who vanished during a training exercise he had conducted more than 50 times. The other involves a retired ranger who returned to the forest where he had worked for 3 decades and disappeared on a trail named after him. After we cover these cases, we will step back and examine what all this evidence means. We will look at the patterns that connect these disappearances. We will consider the theories that have been proposed. We will ask questions that deserve to be asked, even if they cannot be answered. Let us continue. The United States Air Force operates survival training programs at multiple locations across the country. These programs teach aircrews how to survive if they are shot down or forced to eject over hostile or remote territory. The training is demanding, realistic, and conducted by instructors who are among the most skilled survival experts in the military. Fairchild Air Force Base near Spokane, Washington is home to one of these programs. The Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape School, known as SEER, trains thousands of personnel each year. The program includes classroom instruction, field exercises, and realistic simulations designed to prepare aircrews for the worst scenarios imaginable. Master Sergeant William Chen was one of the senior instructors at Fairchild SEER. He had served in the Air Force for 24 years, the last 12 as a survival instructor. Before joining the training cadre, he had served as a pararescue man, one of the most demanding specialties in the military. He had conducted combat rescues in Afghanistan and Iraq. He had survived conditions that would have killed most people. William was 46 years old in November of 2019. He was married with 2 teenage sons. He lived for the outdoors. When he was not teaching survival skills on base, he was practicing them in the mountains and forests of the Pacific Northwest. His colleague said he was the kind of person you wanted with you if everything went wrong. He could survive anywhere, under any conditions. On November 12, 2019, William was leading a field exercise in a remote section of the Caldwell National Forest, approximately 60 miles north of Spokane. The exercise was routine. He had led identical exercises in the same area more than 50 times over the past decade. He knew the terrain intimately. The exercise involved 12 students and 3 instructors. William was the lead instructor, responsible for overall coordination and safety. The students were divided into teams and given survival scenarios to complete over a 48-hour period. The instructors monitored their progress and intervened if safety became a concern. On the afternoon of November 13th, the second day of the exercise, William told the other instructors that he was going to check on a student team that had moved into a drainage approximately 2 miles from the main camp. The team had not reported in on schedule, and William wanted to verify they were okay. He departed camp at approximately 14:30, carrying his radio, GPS tracker, and a small day pack with emergency supplies. He told the other instructors he would radio when he reached the student team and expected to return within 2 hours. At 15:15, William radioed to report that he had located the student team. They were fine, just behind schedule. He was going to observe them for a few minutes, then head back to camp. At 15:47, William made another radio call. This one was different. His voice was calm but strained. He said he had encountered something unusual on the trail back to camp. He said there was a formation on the ground that looked man-made, but he was certain no one had been in that area. He said he was going to investigate briefly. The other instructors asked him to clarify. What kind of formation? What did it look like? William's response was partially garbled by static. The only clear words were stones and circle and shouldn't be here. At 15:52, William made his final transmission. His voice had changed. The calm was gone. He sounded confused, possibly frightened. He said, "There's someone here. I can see them through the trees. They're not moving. They're just watching. I'm going to make contact." The other instructors immediately tried to raise him on the radio. No response. They departed camp within minutes, moving toward William's last known position. They reached the student team at approximately 16:30. The students had not seen William since he left them 45 minutes earlier. The instructors continued along the trail William would have taken back to camp. At approximately 1700, they found his day pack. The pack was sitting in the middle of the trail, positioned upright as if placed there deliberately. Inside were William's emergency supplies, water, food, and GPS tracker. The tracker was turned off. Approximately 20 feet from the pack, they found the formation William had described. It was a circle of stones, approximately 12 feet in diameter. The stones were smooth, rounded, clearly gathered from a nearby creek bed. They had been arranged with obvious care, evenly spaced, forming a nearly perfect circle. At the center of the circle, the ground was disturbed. Leaves and forest debris had been cleared away, exposing bare soil. In the soil, there were marks, impressions that looked almost like writing, but in no language any of the instructors recognized. The marks were fresh. The soil was recently turned. Whatever had made them had done so within hours, possibly minutes. William was not there. The search began immediately. Within hours, more than 40 military personnel were combing the forest. By the next morning, the number had grown to more than 150, including Air Force search and rescue teams, local law enforcement, and civilian volunteers. Dogs were brought in from Fairchild. These were military working dogs trained to track humans in the most difficult conditions. They picked up William's scent at the stone circle and followed it approximately 100 yards into the forest. Then they stopped. The lead dog, a Belgian Malinois named Rex, who had worked with William on numerous exercises, tracked to a specific point among the trees and refused to continue. He circled the area repeatedly, whining, then lay down, and would not move. The handler was confused. Rex had never behaved this way. He tried to encourage the dog to continue. Rex would not budge. A second dog was brought in. She tracked to within 10 feet of where Rex had stopped, then exhibited the same behavior, circling, whining, refusing to proceed. The handlers examined the area where the dogs had stopped. There was nothing visibly unusual. No cliff, no water, no obvious obstacle. Just forest. But the dogs would not continue. They acted as if the trail simply ended at that point. The search continued for 12 days. The terrain was covered exhaustively. Helicopters flew thermal imaging patterns. Ground teams checked every drainage, every rock formation, every possible location where a person might be. William Chen was never found. The stone circle was analyzed by investigators. The stones had been gathered from a creek approximately 300 yards away. Moving them to the circle location would have required multiple trips. The arrangement was precise, almost mathematical. No one could explain who had made the circle or why. The marks in the center of the circle were photographed and analyzed. Linguists examined them, but could not identify them as any known writing system. They appeared intentional, not random, but their meaning could not be determined. William had said there was someone watching him through the trees. He had said he was going to make contact. Then, he had vanished. Who was watching him? The student teams were all accounted for. The other instructors were in camp. No other personnel were in that section of forest. No civilians had permits for that area. William was a trained combat veteran and survival expert. He could identify threats. He could handle dangerous situations. If someone was in those trees, someone dangerous, William would have known how to respond. But he walked toward them anyway. And he never came back. William's wife, Sarah, has spent years trying to understand what happened. She has reviewed every detail of the case. She has spoken with the other instructors, the investigators, the dog handlers. She has visited the stone circle herself. She does not believe her husband simply got lost or had an accident. He was too experienced. He knew that forest too well, and the evidence does not support a simple explanation. She believes William encountered something in that forest, something that left the stone circle, something that was watching from the trees, something that he walked toward and never returned from. She does not claim to know what that something was. She only knows that her husband was one of the most capable survival experts in the military, and he vanished within sight of a formation that should not have existed. William Chen has been missing for 6 years. His case remains officially open within Air Force records. His body has never been found. A 24-year military veteran, a survival instructor who had taught thousands to stay alive, a man who had survived combat and every challenge the wilderness could produce. He found a circle of stones that no one had made. He saw someone watching from the trees. He walked toward them. Gone. What was the stone circle? Who made the marks in the center? Who was watching William from the trees? Where is Master Sergeant William Chen? We do not know. If you are finding these cases as disturbing as we believe you should, take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications. We have one final case to cover, and then we will examine what all of this evidence might mean. The final case returns us to where we began. A park ranger, a forest he knew better than anyone, a trail that bore his name, and an ending that no one saw coming. Olympic National Park on the Washington coast encompasses nearly 1 million acres of wilderness, from glacier-capped mountains to temperate rainforest to rugged Pacific coastline. The park is one of the most ecologically diverse in the United States, home to species found nowhere else on Earth. The park requires a dedicated ranger force to manage and protect it. These rangers spend their careers learning the terrain, the wildlife, the weather patterns, the countless details that make Olympic unique. Some of them spend decades in the same district, becoming as much a part of the landscape as the trees and mountains. Robert Thornton was one of these rangers. Robert had joined the National Park Service in 1982 at the age of 23. He was assigned to Olympic National Park and never left. Over the next 35 years, he rose through the ranks from seasonal ranger to district manager to chief of resource protection. He participated in countless rescues, firefighting operations, and wildlife management efforts. He mentored generations of younger rangers. When Robert retired in 2017 at the age of 58, his colleagues honored him by naming a backcountry trail after him. The Thornton Trail, a 12-mile route through the Elwha River Valley, passed through terrain that Robert had patrolled for more than 3 decades. It was fitting recognition for a man who had given his life to the park. Robert and his wife, Margaret, moved to a small town on the Olympic Peninsula after his retirement. He stayed involved with the park as a volunteer, leading interpretive hikes and assisting with training programs. He could not stay away from the forest that had been his home for so long. On September 8, 2022, Robert told Margaret that he was going to hike the trail named after him. It was something he did several times a year, a way of staying connected to the park and the wilderness he loved. He planned a simple day hike, approximately 8 miles out and back. He departed at approximately 7:30 in the morning. He carried his day pack with water, food, rain gear, and emergency supplies. He wore his old ranger uniform, something he often did on these hikes. He told Margaret he would be home by 5 o'clock. At 5 o'clock, Robert had not returned. Margaret was not immediately worried. Her husband often lost track of time in the forest. She waited. By 7 o'clock, as darkness approached, she became concerned. She called Robert's cell phone. No answer. She called the park dispatch. Rangers reached the trailhead by 8 o'clock. Robert's truck was there. They began hiking in with flashlights. At approximately 9:30, they found Robert's day pack. The pack was hanging from a tree branch approximately 3 miles from the trailhead. It was positioned at about head height, secured by its straps as if someone had deliberately hung it there. Inside were Robert's water, food, rain gear, and emergency kit. Everything was present. Robert's hiking poles were found approximately 50 feet further along the trail, lying crossed on the ground in an X pattern. Robert himself was not there. The search that followed was one of the largest in Olympic National Park history. More than 300 personnel participated over the following 3 weeks. They included current rangers, many of whom had worked with Robert and learned from him. They were searching for one of their own. Dogs were brought in on the first morning. They picked up Robert's scent at the trailhead and followed it along the trail to where his pack was found. Beyond the pack, they tracked approximately 200 yards to a point where the trail crossed a small stream. At the stream crossing, the dogs stopped. The handler, a woman named Patricia Cole, who had known Robert for 15 years, tried to encourage her dog to continue. The dog would not cross the stream. It was not a difficult crossing. The stream was barely a foot deep, with stepping stones that Robert had placed there himself years ago during trail maintenance. There was no reason for a dog to refuse to cross, but 3 different dogs exhibited the same behavior. They tracked to the stream, stopped, and would not continue. 2 of the dogs whined continuously. One lay down on the bank and refused to move. Patricia had worked hundreds of searches in her career. She had never seen anything like this. The search expanded beyond the stream. Teams crossed and covered the terrain on the other side. They found nothing. No tracks. No disturbed vegetation. No sign that Robert had ever crossed that stream. On the 5th day of the search, a volunteer found something approximately 1 mile from the stream crossing, in a dense section of forest well off the main trail. It was Robert's ranger hat. The hat was sitting on top of a moss-covered boulder, positioned carefully as if placed there on display. It was Robert's original hat from his active service, worn and weathered, with his name written inside the band. How the hat got there could not be explained. The terrain between the stream crossing and the boulder was extremely difficult. Dense undergrowth, fallen logs, steep slopes. A person moving through it would have left obvious signs of passage. There were no signs. The vegetation was undisturbed. It was as if the hat had simply appeared on the boulder without anyone carrying it there. The search continued for another 16 days. Robert Thornton was never found. His former colleagues were devastated. Robert was more than a co-worker. He was a mentor, a friend, a legend. He had taught them how to be rangers. He had shown them every trail, every hidden waterfall, every secret place in the park. Now he was gone, and they could not find him. The chief ranger at the time of Robert's disappearance, a man named David Whitfield, who had worked under Robert for 12 years, has said publicly that the case haunts him. He has reviewed the evidence dozens of times. He cannot explain what happened. Robert knew that trail. He had walked it thousands of times. He had literally built parts of it. There was no reason for him to leave the trail, no reason for him to hang his pack on a tree, no reason for him to cross his hiking poles in an X pattern. And there was no explanation for how his hat ended up on a boulder a mile away through impassable terrain. David has a theory, though he does not share it often. He believes Robert encountered something on the trail that day, something unexpected, something that caused him to behave in ways that made no sense. He does not claim to know what that something was. He only knows that Robert Thornton was one of the most experienced rangers in the park's history, and he vanished on a trail named after him, leaving behind evidence that none of his colleagues can interpret. Margaret Thornton still lives on the Olympic Peninsula. She still hikes in the park, though never alone. She visits the Thornton Trail sometimes and walks the first few miles, to the point where her husband's pack was found. She does not go past the stream crossing. She does not know why. She just feels that she should not. She has kept Robert's ranger uniform, the one he was wearing when he disappeared. It was never found. She has kept his badges, his awards, his photographs from 35 years of service. She does not believe her husband is dead. She does not believe he is alive. She does not know what to believe. She only knows that he walked into a forest he had spent his life protecting and never came back. Robert Thornton has been missing for 3 years. His case remains officially open. His body has never been found. 35 years of service, a trail named in his honor, a man who knew Olympic National Park better than anyone alive. He hung his pack on a tree. He crossed his hiking poles. His hat appeared on a boulder a mile away through terrain no one had walked. Gone. What happened on the Thornton Trail on September 8, 2022? Why did Robert hang his pack and arrange his poles? How did his hat appear in an impossible location? Where is Robert Thornton? We do not know. We have now examined 6 disappearances of wilderness professionals across the United States. 6 people who dedicated their lives to mastering the outdoors. 6 people whose skills should have protected them from exactly what happened. Let us consider what these cases have in common. First, the experience factor. These were not amateurs. Thomas Caldwell had 23 years as a park ranger. Derek Morrison had 18 years in the military, including special forces. Michael Reeves had 20 years in search and rescue. Craig Westbrook had more than 20 years as a survival instructor. William Chen had 24 years in the Air Force with combat experience. Robert Thornton had 35 years as a park ranger. Combined, these 6 men had more than 140 years of professional wilderness experience. They were the experts. They were the people who rescue others, who teach others, who know the wilderness better than anyone. Second, the equipment patterns. In every case, equipment was found arranged in ways that suggested deliberate placement rather than accident or panic. Flashlights in the middle of roads, packs hanging from trees, knives stuck in the ground at the center of circles, hiking poles crossed in X patterns, hats on boulders. These arrangements were intentional. But what did they mean? Were the missing persons trying to communicate something? Were they following some compulsion they could not resist? Or was something else arranging their equipment after they were gone? Third, the scent trail patterns. In every case where tracking dogs were used, the dogs tracked to a specific location and refused to continue. Not lost the trail, not became confused, refused to continue. Multiple experienced handlers reported identical behavior from different dogs in different cases. The dogs acted as if the trail simply ended, as if the person had stopped existing at that point. Dogs do not behave this way under normal circumstances. Something was happening at those locations that the dogs perceived, but the handlers could not. Fourth, the radio transmission patterns. 3 of the 6 cases involved radio transmissions made after the disappearance began. Thomas Caldwell transmitted that the stars were wrong and something was in the trees. Michael Reeves transmitted that something was between him and his team. William Chen transmitted that someone was watching him. These were experienced professionals describing things they could not identify, things that frightened them, things that did not fit any known explanation. Fifth, the circle patterns. 2 cases involved geometric arrangements. Craig Westbrook arranged his equipment in a circle before walking away. William Chen found a circle of stones that should not have existed. Circles appear repeatedly in reports of unexplained phenomena. Are they significant? Are they markers? Are they communication? No one knows. Sixth, the location patterns. These disappearances did not occur randomly. They occurred in areas where these professionals had spent years or decades. Thomas Caldwell vanished on a road he had walked thousands of times. Robert Thornton vanished on a trail named after him. They were not in unfamiliar territory. They were home. And something took them anyway. What are we to make of all this? The conventional explanations fail completely. These professionals did not get lost. They knew their terrain too well. They did not have accidents that were never discovered. The searches were too thorough. They did not succumb to weather or exposure. They had the skills and equipment to survive anything nature could produce. They did not encounter animals. There was no evidence of predation, no blood, no signs of struggle. They did not encounter other humans with bad intentions. There was no evidence of foul play, no signs of violence, no motive. Something else happened. Something that the evidence suggests but does not explain. Some researchers have proposed theories that venture into uncomfortable territory. One theory suggests that certain locations contain phenomena that can affect human perception and behavior. Electromagnetic anomalies, infrasound, or other environmental factors might cause disorientation, confusion, or even hallucination. This could explain why experienced professionals suddenly behaved in irrational ways. But this theory does not explain the geometric arrangements of equipment. It does not explain how hats and packs appeared in impossible locations. It does not explain what the dogs were perceiving. Another theory proposes that there are predators in the wilderness that have not been documented by science. Creatures intelligent enough to avoid detection, capable of taking humans without leaving evidence. The reports of being watched, of something in the trees, of figures that could not be identified, might be encounters with something unknown. But this theory does not explain why such creatures would arrange equipment in circles. It does not explain the radio transmissions describing spatial impossibilities, trails that lead nowhere, stars that look wrong. A third theory ventures into territory that most people find difficult to accept. It suggests that certain locations might be thresholds or boundaries where normal physical laws become unreliable. Places where people can be taken somewhere else, somewhere that does not exist on any map. This theory would explain the impossible movements recorded by GPS. It would explain the scent trails that end abruptly. It would explain the descriptions of stars being wrong and trails leading nowhere. It would explain why bodies are never found. But it requires accepting possibilities that science does not currently support. We are not endorsing any theory. We are presenting the evidence as it exists. 6 professionals vanished. Their skills should have saved them. The evidence they left behind does not fit any conventional framework. Something is happening in the wilderness. Something that takes even the most capable people. Something that leaves behind clues that no one can interpret. The families of these missing professionals continue to wait for answers. Their colleagues continue to search years after the official operations ended. They walk the trails where their friends disappeared. They look for anything that might have been missed. They find nothing. The wilderness keeps its secrets. Every year, new rangers join the National Park Service. New soldiers enter survival training programs. New volunteers sign up for search and rescue teams. They dedicate themselves to the wilderness, to helping others, to mastering terrain that most people will never see. Most of them will have long, safe careers. Most of them will retire with stories and memories and the satisfaction of lives well spent. But some of them will not. Some of them will walk into forests they know by heart and never return. Some of them will leave behind equipment arranged in patterns that no one understands. Some of them will make final radio transmissions describing things that cannot be identified. They will become cases like the ones we have examined. Cases that their colleagues discuss in quiet voices. cases that keep them awake at night, cases that make them wonder what is really out there in the places they have dedicated their lives to understanding. We began this investigation by saying these were people who should have been immune to whatever takes people in the wilderness. They were not immune. No one is immune. The wilderness is older than humanity. It existed for millions of years before we arrived. It will exist for millions of years after we are gone. We move through it. We study it. We think we understand it. We do not understand it. There are things in the wild places of the world that we have not discovered. There are phenomena we cannot explain. There are forces we cannot comprehend. The professionals who vanished knew the wilderness better than almost anyone. They spent their lives learning its patterns, its dangers, its beauty. In the end, it was not enough. Something was out there that their training did not prepare them for. Something that their skills could not overcome. Something that took them despite everything they knew. What is it? Where does it come from? What does it want? These questions do not have answers. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. But they deserve to be asked. They deserve to be considered. They deserve to be investigated by people with open minds and rigorous methods. The professionals who vanished would have wanted that. They dedicated their lives to understanding the wilderness. They would have wanted to know what happened to them. They would have wanted the truth, whatever that truth might be. We owe them that much. We owe their families that much. We owe ourselves that much. The wilderness is waiting. It has been waiting for a very long time. It will continue to wait. And sometimes it will take someone, even the best, even the most prepared, even those who know it better than anyone. That is the truth these cases reveal. A truth that is difficult to accept, but impossible to deny. The wilderness does not care how much experience you have. The wilderness does not care how many skills you have mastered. The wilderness does not care how many people you have saved. When it wants you, it takes you, and no one knows why. Thank you for watching all 3 parts of this investigation. If you found these cases as disturbing as we do, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. We will continue examining disappearances that do not fit conventional explanations. We will continue asking the questions that need to be asked. Share this video with someone who works in wilderness professions. Share it with rangers, search and rescue volunteers, military personnel, survival instructors. They need to know these stories. They need to understand what can happen to even the most capable among them. And if you have experienced something in the wilderness that you cannot explain, if you have encountered something that your training did not prepare you for, tell us about it in the comments. Your experience might connect to patterns we have not yet identified. Your story might help us understand what is happening out there. The wilderness is vast. The mysteries are deep. The answers remain hidden. But we will keep looking. We will keep asking. We will keep searching for the truth. Stay safe out there. You never know what is watching.